exact same problem, we'd do so in a far more compassionate, supportive, and realistic way. Once you're aware of this, you can ask yourself if you'd be willing to talk to yourself in the same compassionate way you'd talk to a dear friend. No single method works for everyone, but this one is often effective. I asked Frank to imagine he was talking to a good friend who was very similar to him, like a long-lost identical twin or a clone. This imaginary friend is also a carpenter who's getting close to retirement, and he's been doing carpentry ever since high school. Then I asked Frank what he'd say to this man, if the man confided that he was also feeling depressed in much the same way Frank was. Would he say this to his friend? "Oh, you're getting old and your body won't be able to keep up anymore. But if you retire, then you'll run out of money and you won't be able to support your wife and family. You've never accomplished anything meaningful during your life either." At first, Frank didn't get it. He said that he would say that to his friend because it was the truth. I said, "Okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Let's imagine that I'm your friend. My name is David, but aside from that, I'm just like you. I'm also a carpenter, and all the details of my life are the same as yours. In fact, you can imagine that I'm like a long-lost identical twin. Go ahead and say those things to me. Tell me that I'm getting old and my body can't keep up anymore, that my life has been meaningless, and so forth." Frank looked puzzled and was quiet for about 10 or 15 seconds. Then he said, "Doc, I don't think I could say things like that to a friend." I asked, "Why not?" Frank explained that it would be cruel to belittle a friend who you cared about, and that those statements didn't sound fair or even valid. I asked Frank what he would say to David, his friend. Frank said that he'd say something like this: "Although you're getting older, you're still capable of doing some really good work. If you cut back a bit, which you deserve, you'll still be quite productive. And gosh, look at the beautiful work you just did on this house. The owners seem thrilled, and the work you did looks great. And besides, even if you decide to retire at some point, you have a decent retirement plan, so you and your wife will be fine. Finally, and perhaps most important, think of all the joy you've brought to the people you've worked for during all these years. You've never once had a complaint, you've always done good work at a fair price, and you've never cheated anyone, not even once. That's definitely meaningful. You have a lot to be proud of." I told Frank that what he'd just said sounded helpful and asked if it was true, or was he just saying that to shine me on? He said it was absolutely true. Then I asked, "So if those statements are true about me, and I'm exactly like you, then would those statements be true about you as well?" He paused for a moment and then said, "I guess those statements would be true about me too. You're right." I explained that the reason he'd been depressed was not that he was getting older, but because of the negative way he'd been thinking about things. The harsh messages he'd been giving himself would make anyone unhappy. I asked Frank if he'd be willing to talk to himself the same way he'd talk to a dear friend who was much like him. Suddenly, it was like somebody turned on a light bulb in Frank's brain, and he exclaimed, "Oh, so the problem is just the way I'm thinking? My negative thoughts?" I said, "Exactly." He said, "Wow, I'm feeling so much better. I get it. Thank you, Doc." I explained that the type of treatment we'd just done is called cognitive therapy because you learn to change your thoughts or cognitions. I added that the cool thing was that he'd just completed his treatment in about 5 minutes and wouldn't be needing any pills. I just love it when that happens. It's one of the greatest thrills of my life. That's why I wrote Feeling Good, the new mood therapy, nearly 40 years ago. I wanted to let people know 3 things. 1, you feel the way you think. In other words, your negative emotions like depression and anxiety result from your thoughts and not from the circumstances of your life. 2, the negative thoughts that upset you are nearly always distorted and twisted. They're just not true. Depression and anxiety are the world's oldest cons. 3, when you can change the way you think, you can change the way you feel. And here's what's really important.